Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's kick things off with the ultimate project manager's dilemma. Imagine you're about to start a massive new initiative. What's the literal first thing you do? Well, if you're like most of us, you probably reach right for your favorite methodology, right? You fire up a Gantt chart, or you instantly start mapping out 2-week Agile sprints. But here is the massive fundamental error in that approach. It's picking your methodology before you've actually diagnosed the nature of the work itself. Today, we're completely flipping that script.
It's kind of the big question that keeps project leads awake at night. Why do perfectly planned projects still fail? Think about it this way. Imagine walking into a doctor's office with a high fever, and before they even take your temperature, the doctor just immediately slaps a cast on your leg. I mean, sure, it's a perfectly good treatment, but for an entirely different problem. That is exactly what we're doing when we force a super rigid timeline onto a highly unpredictable project, or vice versa. We absolutely need a proper diagnosis before we write the prescription.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to cover context over methodology, break down the 5 domains, and map out a real project. Then we'll see the framework in action, run through some common mistakes, and wrap up with how this all ties into PMBOK 7. First up, Section 1, Context over Methodology. It's all about choosing the right tool. Now, our focus in this explainer isn't on the nitty-gritty of executing a specific tool. We're not talking about how to run a daily stand-up or how to calculate critical path. Instead, we're looking at the much bigger strategic question of knowing exactly which tool to pick in the first place, based on the environment you're actually operating in. To do this, we use the Cynefin Framework. And yes, first things first, it is pronounced ku-NEV-in. It's a Welsh word that basically translates to habitat or a place of multiple belongings. It was developed back in 1999 by Dave Snowden over at IBM, and it's what we call a meta framework, meaning it doesn't tell you how to do the work. It tells you how to think about the work so you can choose the right methodology. It's literally so effective at matching a project's approach to its context that it's been formally incorporated right into the PMBOK Guide's 7th edition. And for those of you gearing up for the PMP exam, understanding how to map a project to its specific habitat is absolutely critical for nailing those tricky scenario-based questions.
Let's move into Section 2, the 5 domains, where we categorize these situations.
So what's really interesting here is that Cynefin posits every single project challenge can be sorted into one of 5 distinct domains based on cause and effect. There's a stark contrast between the comfortable, predictable environments and the completely unpredictable ones. Let's break down the first 4. First up, we have the clear domain. Here, cause and effect are totally known and repeatable. You sense, you categorize, and you respond. Think payroll processing or standard construction. You just use a predictive waterfall style. The best practices already exist, so you know, just follow the recipe. Second is complicated. Cause and effect are knowable, but they aren't exactly obvious. You need experts to investigate. You sense, analyze, and then respond. Building a bridge or rolling out a massive ERP system lives here. You're still using predictive planning, but it's heavily expert-driven. Then we cross a boundary into total unpredictability with the complex domain. Here, cause and effect are really only knowable in retrospect. There are just way too many interacting variables. Launching a brand new, never-before-seen product, you can't overanalyze it. You have to probe, sense, and respond. You run small experiments. This is the natural home of agile and iterative methods. Finally, we have chaotic. Cause and effect are unclear or totally absent. The factory is literally on fire, or you're suffering a massive cyber attack. There's zero time to probe or analyze. You must act first just to stabilize things, then sense, then respond. This is pure crisis management. But wait, there is a 5th domain, and honestly, it's perhaps the most important one to recognize. Domain 5 is confused, sometimes called disorder. This is the meta-domain. It represents the state of simply not knowing which of the other 4 domains applies to your situation. If you've ever looked at a project and felt this overwhelming sense of paralysis, it's almost certainly because the project is in the confused domain. You likely have different stakeholders implicitly treating the project as if it belongs to totally different domains, and someone is trying to use a single, unified approach to manage fundamentally conflicting parts. So how do we fix that? Let's get into Section 3, mapping your project, using some key diagnostic questions. To get out of that confused domain, we need a methodical diagnostic flow. You essentially ask these 5 questions as a strict process of elimination. Question 1. Has anyone done this exact thing before in this exact context? If yes, great, you're in the clear domain. Question 2. If it's not exact, has anyone done something similar and can experts reliably analyze and plan it out? If yes, it's complicated. Question 3. Is the outcome dependent on a ton of interacting variables that you absolutely cannot model in advance? If yes, it's complex. Question 4. Is the situation actively bleeding value with literally zero time for analysis? If yes, it's chaotic. And finally, question 5. Do different parts of your massive project answer differently to these questions? If yes, your project is confused and you must break it apart. Now, quick warning here. The single biggest mistake project managers make is answering yes to step 3, realizing there are too many unpredictable variables, but then going ahead and building a 6-month Gantt chart anyway. That is a guaranteed recipe for disaster. Let's see this in Section 4, the framework in action, through a high-stakes scenario. Okay, let's see how this diagnostic tool actually works in a real-world, highly pressurized situation. Here is the scenario. Your company just acquired a smaller competitor. They have overlapping product lines, a totally incompatible CRM system, and a very strong, distinct engineering culture. And the CEO, naturally, wants the entire integration completed in exactly 9 months. So you have 3 main work streams: A, consolidating the 2 CRMs, B, merging the product roadmaps, and C, integrating the engineering team's cultures. Take a quick second and mentally challenge yourself. If you had to categorize these 3 work streams using the domains we just talked about, where would you put them? Now, the traditional, outdated instinct is to treat this entire acquisition as a monolithic, complicated project. You know the drill. You assign leads, you build one giant 9-month integrated Gantt chart, and you report to a steering committee. But applying Cynefin reveals the real climax of this scenario. This entire thing is actually a confused domain situation. Treating it as a single complicated project is a massive mistake. To succeed, we absolutely must decompose it into 3 separate subprojects that live in totally different domains. And this brilliantly illustrates how one monolithic project fractures into 3 completely different methodologies when you actually apply context. Look at the CRM consolidation. That's complicated. Cause and effect are known by your IT experts. You can absolutely use a traditional, predictive approach with a solid data migration plan and gated approvals. But the product roadmap merge, that is complex. It depends on customer reactions, competitor moves, internal politics. You can't predict that 9 months out. You have to run this as iterative discovery, testing hypotheses every 90 days or so. Finally, the engineering culture. Merging human systems is inherently complex, but in those first 30 days post-acquisition, when key people might just up and quit, that is leaning heavily into chaotic. You need immediate command and control stabilization before you can even think about shifting into a complex, retrospective-driven Agile approach. If you ignore this diagnostic step and just force everything into that single 9-month Gantt chart, here is exactly what your failure timeline is going to look like. Month 1, you failed to stabilize the chaotic cultural issues because, well, you're too busy writing planning documents. By month 6, you've got this massive false confidence because the CRM migration is hitting its milestones, people are ticking boxes, everything looks green. But by month 7, the schedule meets reality. The complex work streams, the product fit, and the human culture, they fall completely apart. Why? Because they were never actually on a predictable trajectory to begin with. Misclassification creates a schedule that reality simply will not honor. Which brings us to Section 5, Common Cynefin Mistakes, the pitfalls to avoid. Now that we've seen how powerful this framework is, let's talk about what not to do once you start using it. Starting with executive board meetings. Cynefin is often the wrong concept to lean on when an executive demands a single % complete number for a massive program. Cynefin might correctly tell you that 30% of the work is in the complicated domain and on a nice, predictable timeline, while 70% is in the complex domain and literally cannot be estimated with a simple percentage. Now, that is the analytically correct answer, for sure, but it's a terrible message for a board meeting. You have to translate Cynefin's accurate diagnosis into language and risk mitigation steps that your stakeholders can actually digest, rather than trying to force the framework to spit out a single vanity metric. Let's rapidly run through some of the other top mistakes practitioners make. Number 1, classifying complex as complicated. Human nature loves the false safety of analysis. Complex feels deeply uncomfortable, so we pretend we can analyze our way out of it. Listen, if an expert can't guarantee the outcome, it's complex. Full stop. Number 2, skipping the confused domain entirely just to force a single classification. If your stakeholders disagree on the domain, decompose the project first. Number 3, treating chaotic as forever. Crisis mode feels highly effective in the first 24 hours, but if you keep doing it, you will absolutely burn your team out. Once stabilized, move it to complex. Number 4, mapping only once. Projects migrate. A complicated task might suddenly hit a complex roadblock. You have to reevaluate at different phases. And finally, number 5, using the framework as mere decoration, just using Cynefin vocabulary to justify the methodology you were secretly going to use anyway. Don't do that. All right, let's wrap up with Section 6, Cynefin and PMBOK 7, Professional Standards. Let's tie this all together and see how this builds a solid foundation for your PMP exam applications. The crucial point here is this definitive mapping key. PMBOK 7 adopted Cynefin because older guides didn't really explain why you choose a specific life cycle. Now, we have the why. If your scenario describes a clear or complicated domain, you match it to a predictive or traditional life cycle. If the scenario describes a bunch of interacting variables and unpredictability, the complex domain, you match it to an adaptive or agile life cycle. If it's chaotic, well, that requires emergency response patterns until things are stabilized. And if it's confused, your immediate action is to decompose. Identify the domain first, then select the PMBOK life cycle that matches. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Cynefin is not a project management methodology itself. It is a framework that tells you which methodology to use. The ultimate discipline here is to step back, classify the work first, and only then pick your tools. So the next time you face a massive new challenge, ask yourself, are you just blindly prescribing a methodology because it's what you know, or are you actually taking the time to diagnose the habitat? Master that diagnosis, and I promise you, you'll fundamentally change the trajectory of every single project you lead. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.